know by name.
Good.
You must know by
Did someone call my name like a distant drum that's beating? Or is it just another dream of long ago? I dance again, I am spinning in the light I am living, and I can feel the power rushing through my veins. Once upon a time, I could do no wrong. Though the candle flickers, the flame is never gone. To my billion feet, they all pay heed. I hear the crowds roar, oh so loudly. muto, ayowe. Wandena tandino, muto, ndena kieno, muto, sono si bangamba wenge, kenataka mulema. Wandena tandino, muto, wandena kieno, muto, sono si chomamba wenge, kenasuma mulema. Muto, natoniwa, muto, nakiyewa, muto, natoniwa, muto, nakiyewa, Ayembana wedi, ayembana taka mule mamwa mumende na songyamba tibumbu nyamene. Ayembana wedi, ayembana taka mule mamwa mumende na songyamba tibumbu nyamene. Koma misali osima bweyamba ndeti tona unde na maladi osima sise yamba bebe tona unde na yuyu osima bweyamba ndeti ayemba nuni munawo ayembana wedi, ayembana taka mule mamwa mumende no songyamba tibumbu nyamene. Ayembana wedi, ayembana taka mule mamwa mumende no songyamba tibumbu nyamene. Tona koma misali osima bweyamba ndeti tona onde na maladi osima sise yamba bebe tona onde na yuyu osima bweyamba ndeti ayemba nuni munawo tona koma misali osima bweyamba ndeti tona wone na malari osima sise yamba bebe ayemba nuni munawo tona koma misali osima bweyamba ndeti ayemba nuni munawo
Sole kaunisu hawala delinga folia nevalule kaunisu hawala delinga folia mensara naula hakana utolodo makano mensara faula sikani tolodo makano mensara nkorola hakana utolodo makano mensaran koro sikani tolo don ke ba koro kano ae 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 un solule ae 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 un solule ae 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 un solule ae ae jonko nadi Soya Canada and the Woloma, Kabara, Kakalange, Kadin Wolo, Kotono Dungaki, Jeff, Fanagaki, Fama Bebo Musola, Condamba Muso, Jamana Bebo Muso, Fama Bebo Musola, Condamba Muso, I receive Bebo Muso.
Brama kabara ye bara dilaye, brafo brama kabara ye bara firi fana ni brafo brama tilala ka bara dilala, brafo brama baka bara do firi, ni brafo brama tilala ka bara dilala, brafo brama baka bara wo fache, brafo brama ya ka 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 bara wo fache.
let the mundo so funky. Hey, loving people, 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 let the mundo so funky. You got to shake it harder. You got to shake it harder. You got to shake it harder.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We would like to get started shortly. Thank you so much for your patience. We know it's a crazy week and it's raining on top of it all, plus the traffic, but we're almost at the finish line. So we're going to do our very best to get started and make this a wonderful event and give it the significance that it deserves. We're ready? Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and to viewers watching from around the world on the Afreximbank live stream, welcome to the untold story of Africa's pandemic response. It is a dramatic story of guts, of teamwork and determination, as our continent faced down a microscopic virus that threatened our lives. As a Kenyan, I would say this is a story of Harambee. Harambee is a Swahili word that is significant in Kenyan culture and national identity. It literally means to pull together. It embodies the spirit of community, collaboration, and mutual support. So the COVID days were our greatest Harambee. We all witnessed how the world chose to distribute vaccines to the wealthy and white. The world turned its back on our continent despite dire predictions that COVID would ravage Africa. As Africans, we are used to this. We have had these kinds of racist attitudes from the West. And we said, this time, enough is enough. And we came together. Our leaders pulled together, demonstrating extraordinary leadership. Our communities showed collective responsibility, and individuals showed immense courage. We found our own solutions, our own approach for our own people, and with our own money. Yes, I think that was the one that... Today, we are honored to unveil 2 pieces of work which will ensure that Africa's COVID story is captured accurately. You will be the first to see a documentary clip of Africa, COVID, and beyond. And the book announcement of Riding the Storm, the untold story of Africa's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. These works are a testimony to the truism that not all superheroes wear capes. They chronicle the heroic efforts of our African leaders coming together to battle a tiny super villain that brought the world to a shuddering stop. You will hear about how Africa unified its position, how we pooled resources, how we broke through barriers, how we broke through boundaries. The urgent conversations, the late night strategy sessions, the fight against the clock. From vaccine procurement to delivery, it was a battle. And we did not take no for an answer. And failure was not an option. As our classic proverb reminds us, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Africa's success in battling the pandemic demonstrates how we came together as nations, as a people, as Africans, to allow us to go far. It's now my pleasure to invite to the stage the award-winning filmmaker and journalist, Carol Pinault, producer and director of the upcoming documentary, Africa, COVID, and Beyond. But first, I invite you to watch a short clip. Thank you.
The modeling suggested that about 20 million Africans would die within 6 months. The choice was fold your arms and let 20 million deaths occur, or you fight.
There was a promise that when vaccines came, they would be distributed equitably. COVAX was created, and then COVAX was not funded.
It concerned me so much because it took 10 years for antiretroviral to be introduced in Africa.
India had been assigned the production of this vaccine for Africa, and we saw the red lights flashing.
We saw that we are on our own. We estimated what it would cost us to vaccinate the continent.
You know what's going to happen here, don't you?
Europe was not letting vaccines get out of Europe. The US was not letting vaccines get out of the US.
It was very clear that early on that was all going to be nationalism. It's no longer sharp elbows now. Everybody's got their knuckles. We're thumping on the table.
We put $2 billion to back it because no vaccine manufacturer could talk to you unless you could show the person. And then we were able to negotiate and close the deal.
The Caribbean, they're not getting vaccines either. And everybody looked at me and said, well, can you find vaccines for them? I said, well, we're all together in this.
The history of this pandemic is being written, and Africa, to be quite honest, was the only region that had such a coordinated approach.
Africa now has a much bolder stance because we have been resilient.
You must always take your destiny in your hands.
Well, hello everyone, saying thank you so much for welcoming everyone. And I am so excited to be on the stage with these four. This was one of the most extraordinary stories I have seen come out of Africa ever. So we have with us Professor Benedicta Roma, Strive Masiyiwa, Vera Songwe, and Dr. John Nkengasong. And the four of them, every single night for I think it was 2 years during COVID, during the height of this, were on Zoom together, solving the problems, figuring it out, whatever came up. The four of them were there dealing with everything that came up. Remember back to what it was like in early 2020. We didn't know what was going to happen. We had no idea. And exactly as Zane has said, the experts, the supposed experts said there would be 20 million dead. And as Dr. John Nkengasong said, we decided we had to fight. So, what was, oh. Should we continue? Oh. Should we continue? So we are very honored to have the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, and yes. We're not sure how your time is. Can we go ahead with the panel and then have you, or should we have you come up now? Because I know this is Unga. It's a difficult time. It's about 40 minutes. No, let her come up. Yeah, okay. We're going to take we'll take a commercial break. And we will have a public service announcement from the Prime Minister.
She's a total rock star who needs no introduction. But we are so honored to have her here, and I'd like to invite to the stage Her Excellency Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados. Thank you for making this time in the craziness. Please open our session with a few words. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Everyone can hear me? Yes, hear the mic? I'm accustomed to speaking loudly, but I suppose since this is supposed to be a commercial break, I have to have a different voice. Distinguished members of the panel, but in particular, my dear friend, Professor Arama, who has been singular in his commitment and drive to bridge the Atlantic between Africa and the Caribbean, and who literally has been responsible for turning the corner in breaking a mindset that has existed for centuries, that has kept us divided. I'm here because of you, sir, and because of all that you have done in the last few years. In 2020, when I was chair of CARICOM, the Caribbean community, COVID hit. And in the deep, deep, dark days, when we could find no light, when we could have and find very few allies, there were a few who stepped up to the plate. I want to single out Professor Arama and the Africa Supplies Platform as one of those. Ironically, I've just come from the antimicrobial resistance high-level meeting, which Dr. Tedros, with his support of the quadripartite approach, would have led. And it was through my participation as chair of that One Health Global Leaders Group that I got to find out about Strive Masiyiwa and the Africa Medical Supplies Platform. The Caribbean community, as I said, was particularly affected, especially those countries like Barbados and Bahamas and Antigua that were considered as middle-income countries. And many of us were precluded from access even within the context of the Pan American Health Organization because of the per capita income status. It therefore meant that we had to search far and wide. And we searched as countries powerful, like even this one at the time, imposed export restrictions on ventilators. We searched, knowing full well that the big pharmaceutical companies, and I still remember the meeting with one of them, wanted your property, your mother, your father, your children, in order to be able to access a few vaccines. And that did not work. When we asked developed countries, you had very quickly a situation where you understood that even though a prime minister could give a commitment, a minister of health or a minister of foreign affairs could trump it conveniently. There was no form of inappropriate behavior that we did not experience until between Dr. Tedros and Strive, President Ramaphosa, President Kenyatta, and a few others, my brother, President of Ghana, all came together and said, stop. The Caribbean community needs to join the Africa Medical Supplies Platform. We may not have access to all, but we have scale, and by reason of scale, we have attention that you don't have. Equally, we are able to negotiate prices for St. Kitts and Nevis of 38,000 people. That will be the same as for a Nigeria with an excess of 200 million people. You will now understand why I will go to the ends of the earth to be able to work with Professor Arama and the people of Africa, because at a time when Africa itself was facing its most difficult moment, not being the location of manufacturing, that Africa reached out. I also want to salute President Kagame, because in those early days he was resolute about the importance of developing the additional manufacturing beyond South Africa. And today, I was happy in December to be able to go to the opening of the factory in Kigali that came out as a result of that resolute commitment, and with the assistance of the European Investment Bank, and in particular a gentleman, Holm Keller, and the Kenneth Foundation. We do not forget, and we must never forget. The benefit of that platform is not limited to the pandemic. We have used the example of that pooled procurement digital platform to be able to inspire us within the Caribbean community that in so many areas, particularly, for example, in the procurement of what is necessary for the just transition to renewable energy, that we can use that as an example. But I go even further. Not only should we be looking at pooled procurement, but we need to be looking at also pooled investment. Vera, you and I have been fighting the battle of trying to get greater equity in the financial system, and you've done excellent work with Nicholas Stern and others, and you have been the voice that has literally pointed out the absolute importance for the adrenaline shot for liquidity to avoid countries becoming dependent on an IMF program and becoming dependent on a cycle perhaps of underdevelopment. We need to ensure that we think outside the box. And my own community of the Caribbean, which is not a large grouping at all, and with Haiti will come close to 20 million, but without Haiti is down in 6 and 7 million across the other remaining 14 countries. You can see that when we place an order, we do not excite even most people's eyelashes, far less their brain. So we have, therefore, to find a way. And one of the ways that we can find is looking at the fact as to how we can pool our renewable energy capacity as a region and look for single offtake agreements rather than trying to do it country by country by country and not being enough to equal and satisfy the appetite of others. I hope, therefore, that you appreciate that sometimes you only need to be able to have a direction pointed. And Professor Arama, your willingness to take risk, your willingness to go where others are not prepared to go, your willingness to see the people of Africa and to give them an opportunity for investment so that we can control our own destiny has been almost singular in the area of financing. I almost said development financing, because even though you head an Exim Bank, you have done more for development than most. And therefore, I thank you. So my friends, I will stay and listen to a bit of the panel. And when I ease out, it is not a sign of disrespect, but I do pray that the solidarity that was formed with the African Medical Supplies platform is one that we must maintain at all costs. And the reality is that if we remain resolute in where we need to go, and if we remain together in how we get there, then I believe that the hope that most of us wish for can remain as the dominant emotion rather than the despair and the division and the hate that others are trying to excite the world to go to. And most of it is not because of any substantive reasons. Most of it is still rooted in a failure to accept that there are no first-class and second-class citizens of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those powerful words and reminding us all that Africa is strongest when we are pulling together. We also appreciated the reference to the adrenaline shot, liquidity in Africa. So take two, Carol Pina.
Yes. If every commercial break were as amazing as that, none of us would leave the television with commercial breaks. So thank you so much, Prime Minister. So we are so fortunate to have all of the 4 AVATT principles together. Normally, this is something that happens only on Zoom as they would meet. And I really want to go back to those early days and think about what it was like at that time. And let's watch Nkengasong, Dr. Nkengasong, talk about it in the video. We have a clip of it.
The modeling suggested that about 20 million Africans would die within 6 months, and it could have been possible. But I said that will only happen if the continent did not fight. The choice was fold your arms and let 20 million deaths occur, or you fight. About 260,000 deaths have occurred, not million deaths. And a lot of that is attributed to the leadership structure, the commitment, the community engagement, the all hands on deck approach that Africa took.
Well, and fight you did. And so actually, Dr. Nkengasong, I want to start with you. Why do you think that these projections were so wrong? What did they not get about the resources that you would have to be able to fight this?
No, thank you. Let me start with the fighting part. When for 100 years, we've always talked about a pandemic, and the only pandemic truly that was a fast-moving pandemic, respiratory pandemic, was 100 years ago, the Spanish flu. And suddenly we are surprised with a pandemic. Your lessons from public health are thrown away because you know the basic things of who is infected, how is he infected or she infected, and what do you do with it? It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what can you do to save lives? And it throws the whole confusion where you know that you're fighting, as I said, with your bare hands because you don't have a vaccine. You don't have any mask. I mean, you don't have any, and the things we used to rub in our hands, and I don't even know how effective that was. I mean, but you try to go to war with what you have, not what you need. That was the spirit of it. But you also understood that you have to humble yourself and say, you cannot do this alone. You have to do this in partnership. You need to get somebody who knows about money. I was clueless about money. You need to do this with somebody who knows strategies and connect with the president. That's why Strive was our strategist. They knew exactly who to connect. And you need to do this with people who can mobilize ministers of finance, because very quickly, it was no longer an issue with ministers of health. They were as helpless as I was. So I spoke with them the least. I spoke mainly with ministers of finance that Vera would mobilize, and we talked to them. So that humility to understand that you have to bring others together to fight. I mean, it was difficult to define the fight, but we just know that we had to fight.
That's fantastic. And really, I think that's one of the most important things of people coming together. You know, one of the things that I have seen in the last year of doing this film is that these four and people throughout Africa truly were heroes. And Dr. Nkengasong, if I can just say, the story that really touched me was you said that you were seconded from Atlanta CDC, and that then you were starting the Africa CDC. They were evacuating all Americans, and you said, no, that's like a general leaving at the first bullet. I'm not leaving. That truly is heroism to me, and that was amazing. Yes, absolutely. So, Strive, if you can take us through, sort of let us be a fly on the wall of one of your AVATT calls. What was it like? The four of you, each of you brought something really different to the table. Like, none of this could have happened if it hadn't been all four of you. If there had been 3 out of the 4 or 2 out of the 4. So take us through what it was like, and how did you come together? How did this happen?
No, thank you. And thank you, Prime Minister Motley, for those profound remarks. First of all, let me take you back to the structure. The African Union, when it is dealing with a crisis, often appoints special envoys who they are used to coordinate. Kofi Annan was a special envoy, Cyril Ramaphosa, they all served as special envoys. And this was my second turn at it. President Ramaphosa was sitting as that year's rotating president. He called me in March and said that they had set up the Bureau of African Presidents, which is sitting like an executive of the heads of state. There are about 15 of them, would be meeting every 2 weeks over this crisis. So nothing like that had ever happened. And there would be 7 envoys. So I'm actually just one of the 7. I was given supply chains and financing the response to the supply chains. But we had others, Dr. Kaberuka, Ngozi, and others working on the financial impact of the COVID. So it was a very structured response. I was told that I would work with these 3, okay? Professor Orama, Dr. John Nkengasong, and Dr. Songwe, because she's responsible for UNECA. So the 3 of us would meet every single day. We met every single day for 2 years. And of course, it's important to realize that at the heart of this operation were the national structures, the ministries of health, the ministries of finance. We would meet with 54 ministers of health and finance almost every week. They'd all be on screen, and we would be discussing. Dr. Nkengasong would give his report. Every single week, we had a press conference at which Dr. Nkengasong and myself would be roasted about what was going on. So it wasn't always that pleasant, let me assure you. At our first meeting with the heads of state, John laid out the trajectory of the disease, of the pandemic. Behind him were all the ministries of health and all the centers for disease control. So this is a continental response to a crisis on a scale we'd never seen before. So it's very important not to just look at the four of us. Truly the heroes, the ministers of health, our healthcare workers. First mission we were confronted with, because this is long before vaccines, the first mission was PPE. Remember that? Test kits. We walked into a meeting with WHO and we said, where are our test kits? And they said, you will receive, I think, John, was it 4 million over 16 weeks?
2.1 million.
2.1 million, and I went berserk. I'm sorry I lost it. I started shouting and screaming. How do we even test? We needed to protect the healthcare workers, the nurses and doctors, 10 million of them going into the field. And I'll stop at our first meeting with the heads of state. So 15 heads of state, all the regional leaders, the president of Egypt, Nigeria, everybody there, and the president of Kenya says, this is all very good, but what about the Caribbean? I said, Caribbean? What about the Caribbean? He says, well, you will have to treat them as African countries. It was almost as though it became every meeting, President Kenyatta would say, would the special envoy please advise me where we are on the Caribbean? And so we realized that we had to treat the Caribbean countries. And I'll stop with this one small point. We agreed on, we knew we weren't, whatever we got, we had to distribute equitably. So we came to the heads of state and we said, we have a formula of the distribution of everything. We take your country's population and the continental population of 1.3 billion. So whatever we get, you are entitled to your country's population. So we literally went through country by country, and Nigeria was 16%. And every Caribbean island was on that list. Okay? And Professor Orama one day turned around, we were going through all these very small Caribbean islands with very small populations, Seychelles and so forth. He said, you know, Strive, let's forget this percentage, just give them what they want. But that is really how we allocated. We allocated based on your country's population. That's what the heads of state then signed off, and that became the formula. So it wasn't just, vaccines came much later, but it was PPE, ventilators, whatever. So we had to first of all get everybody in masks from China and what have you. So then we created the digital platform. We said, okay, every week we will simply post on the platform how that will work. Thank you.
We're getting to that. You're taking the good parts. So thank you so much, Strive. And you know, when you talked earlier about the issue of test kits, and I really want to at least have some discussion about what happened with the international community. And Professor Orama, we've talked about this before of, you know, the international community, all these experts said, you're going to have as many as 20 million dead, and then where were they as far as helping?
No,
The tough questions from my friend here.
no, thank you very much. That is a very good question. You see, one thing is not helping, but the bad thing is giving you a promise that looks like a beautiful cake in the sky. You see, the US was an exception. President Trump made clear that America was not going to give anybody anything until they handled their own situation. which was very good for us because it was very clear that we had to go look for our own solution. But the others actually had the same policy, but they told us they were going to give us. And because our people for so many years depended on handouts, they postponed decisions they would have taken early enough. They were waiting for those handouts that never came. We, in the meetings Strive was referring to the Bureau, we kept telling them, even for the vaccines, that it didn't make sense that people had gone to sign on the COVAX arrangement. The COVAX arrangement was a multilateral arrangement that all signatories committed to distribute vaccines whenever they arrived on a fair and equitable basis. What that meant was that if only 10 vaccines came and you decided to start with the old or vulnerable, you probably distribute it the way Strive mentioned, maybe population-wise or whatever. But the ink with which they signed the COVAX did not dry. They went immediately and bought up all the vaccines from the factories expected to produce those vaccines. And they actually, we found this out later, did not allow their banks to give loans for vaccines. So there was no help. And it was understandable, by the way, people were dying, and one would expect that the first priority of any government would be for the people. But we didn't know enough in time. So African people didn't respond very quickly the way they would have responded. If not for the push we were given, things would happen worse. So we had to find our own solution. And Strive, the business person, was there to make sure that despite the fact that people had bought up everything, we got the Africa quota in China for the PPEs and test kits through a special arrangement that Strive got President Ramaphosa to reach with the president of China. Despite the fact that the vaccines were no longer available, even when we had the money, we had to find ways to put pressure on the European Union to share the vaccines that were manufactured, produced in Africa, so that we could get something to pay for. So no help came. The only help came to us really when President Biden won the election. When President Biden won the election, that was actually when COVAX was funded. It was not funded all this while they didn't have money to implement what they committed to implement. But it was then that also vaccine donations started coming to Africa. So if you ask me, I would say that clarity came from the US, but it didn't come from others. It affected early decisions for Africa. And when President Biden came, he opened the doors, help came, and because I believe America then opened the doors, others then started helping. So that is what I would say was the help from the international community. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And you really start to see, if not for these four, how many millions more would have died in Africa. Vera, one of the things.
No, I just wanted to help with some timeline issues so that you can understand some of the things that Prof pointed out to, and Vera will come in and tell you the amazing job she did. But from a timeline point of view, I want you to go back. We were all here. So we knew, so you are in 2020, and we know that there are vaccine candidates. So the extraordinary technology around vaccines was amazing, as John will tell you. So we knew the vaccines were there, that there would be about 9, 10 candidates. And the conversations begin. The world had never produced so many vaccines in a single year. So we knew there'd be massive production bottlenecks. But how would they be distributed when they became available? And basically boiled down to the fact that countries that had production capacities, they would control who got vaccines. That's what it boiled down to. And we did not have production capabilities except in one country, South Africa. And we will talk about that a little bit later on, about how we then solve that problem. But for, as Professor says, I think it was in June that year that we had the COVAX agreement. But we knew that people would not adhere to what they had said. And we went to our heads of state and said, we've got to find our own path on this to at least get to 50% of our requirement of what John had said we needed. Vera, maybe you can pick it up from there.
Actually, if we can move forward with the thing that I really wanted to ask you, Vera, was one of the two things that I've seen that really made a difference for Africa is leadership. And leadership starting with President Ramaphosa at the head of the African Union, all the way down to presidents, ministers, African institutions, and all the way down to the guy in the market who kept your local market open so people didn't starve. The other thing is you talked about the Harambee in Kenya, Ubuntu spirit in Southern Africa, the coming together. And this is the joining with the Caribbean. And I just would love for you to talk about leadership and people coming together. What kinds of things were happening on the ground? Because you were the great convener of so many people.
And thank you. And I think, yes, there's 4 of us here, but there's, I see Oluronti and Ekene, who is out there, and everybody should look at Ekene. He's like the one who made sure that we could all meet every evening, and many other people from all of our institutions that helped us. And that was part of the leadership because, and I must say, actually, to everybody, these people are such busy people at the time, and you can imagine, and he was saving lives, he was saving businesses, he was saving governments. But that everybody decided, that they will take this time out of what was already an exhausting day to come together and say, okay, what next? What's the next big problem? How are we going to make this work? How are we going to get the platform going when we were still at the PPE stage? Was, somebody needed to fund it, somebody needed to make sure that it could work, somebody needed, Fatoumata Bai is not here, but somebody needed to run the platform, and she got, the sort of technology behind the African Medical Supply platform that started selling the PPEs, and then we had the big debate. Remember, all of this happened just when we had started celebrating the CFTA, and so there was a big debate, should we only have African suppliers on the platform, or should we bring foreign suppliers? And at the time, it was just like, just put anybody who can give us a mask should get on the platform. We will split the platform into African providers and foreign providers. So if one really wanted to do the Africans, they could go to the Africans, but, get. And interestingly, we started finding, this is the strength and the power of the continent, right? Producers from all over the place started, sort of African producers. And if you remember, we started making African masks and with African cloth, and as John says, whether they worked or not, at least they were helping to some extent, and we were getting the processes going. But I will always remember, I think, you talk about leadership. For me, one of the sort of most endearing leaders that I met at that time was somebody called Kenneth Odeide, and I don't know if you know Kenneth Odeide. And Kenneth Odeide was the leader of the slums of Kenya. And he called me and he said, okay, I know you're doing all these things and I know you want people to wear masks and wash their hands, and but we can feed ourselves. What are you talking about masks? What are you talking about all these things for? You have to worry about us just waking up in the morning and feeding ourselves. How can we do that? And you know, we reached out to President Uhuru at the time, and we said, you know, the slums, there's a different kind of problem in there. We need to figure out how to do it. And he went out, and thank God for Kenya and the phones and all, and they were able to immediately, I think they did the fastest, largest safety net disbursement program that we have seen on the continent in such a short time. But this was because Kenneth Odeide, who otherwise would never have had his voice go to the top, you know, and he called, and you know, then you call and you say, what are we going to do with these people? There's so many of them, and there's a leader on the other side who has the vision to say, you know, we can disburse directly to cell phones, and it happens. And so it was just an amazing, because Kenneth was, I mean, you know, he was kind of the president of the slums of Kenya, right? This was his constituency, and he had the passion. And I was listening to him on the phone, and you know, half of me was like, "Oh my God, all these people are going to collapse and die, and they don't have anything." And you know, and so then you reach out to a head of state and you say, "What are we going to do with this?" And he goes, you know, and within 2-3 weeks, there were safety nets going out, and it's just an amazing sort of when our leaders want to do stuff, they really do it well. I think it is part of that story, and just John was every day and every, was it Wednesdays? He used to give us sort of the state of play. And you will worry because the curve kept going up. And you know, I would leave there and just say, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then Strive in the evenings and those meetings, you know, depending on, the meeting will go depending on how Strive looked, you know. If Strive came to the meeting feeling a little bit, and then he'll go off on a rant for like, you know, with the rest of the world. And Prof will calm him down, and but so it was a therapy session. But it really, I think, and then, you know, there were the African finance ministers, and the finance ministers essentially are created to say no to health ministers. Right? This is not what they do in the morning. It's not to sort of give more money to health ministers. But then I think they started seeing their budgets, you know, remember we closed borders, there was no more growth, there was no revenue coming in, and it became a fiscal problem. It was just no longer a health issue, it was a fiscal problem. And so all of a sudden when we would call the finance ministers, they were there. Because it was no longer a health issue, it was also a fiscal, it was a growth, it was a development issue. And I must really, really thank Prime Minister Motley, because at the time also she was leading the finance ministers panel in the World Bank, and really carried that voice of all the finance ministers that could sort of take the message back that the continent needed help. So yes, you know, Africa was sort of helping the Caribbean, but she led the charge for all the emerging market ministers at the World Bank, at the IMF, to say, this is what we're facing today, and this is the kind of help that we need to put together. So really, it was just a plethora of leaders that you know, we found at different places to come up and help us respond.
That's fantastic. And I think, yeah. You know, we still have, oh, okay.
So if I may, just that's perfect timing to segue. Her Excellency, the Prime Minister, actually needs to leave, but we can't let you leave without a photograph to capture the moment with our key principals and our superheroes of the continent. So if we may just take a photograph with the Prime Minister together, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Why don't you come sit where I was? Well, we're going to continue on with a video, and in talking about people coming together and what really saved Africa, of these Pan-African solutions, and that everybody being ready to help, from the private sector, government, civil society, everybody. And Vera, we have a video of you talking about the private sector coming together in a project with you. So if we can see the one of Vera.
The world was facing a crisis, and I think everybody who was in a position of leadership just needed to be asked. We needed to know who was contaminated, who was not. And so we got the telecom companies to say, can we have, the phone numbers? So we actually built a database. It's quite crazy. And we probably had the cell phones of about 750 million people on the continent. And we were going to use AI to start analyzing the spread. We got Alibaba to give us some of the fastest computing machines in the world. And we started an AI center, which still exists today. And, Merck's and the big shipping companies of the world are now using it to manage their data.
So, and that platform in the AI Center, you actually encouraged me to go and see them, and they were amazing. So,
I want to say something about that. So, first of all, it was, I don't think the cell phone companies of the continent have ever sort of come together like they did during that time. And I must really thank MTN and the former CEO. Unfortunately, he's passed away. But, we gave him a call and we said we needed to understand the spread. And because only if we understood the spread will we be able then to anticipate. And he said, I can give you my database, but we need everybody's database. Within 1 week, he came back. And the top 10 cell phone companies on the continent had agreed to join the database. So we had everybody's cell phone. And the idea then was that we were going to send messages to people to tell them what was happening, working with John and his team, and they were helping us on that, and Strive. And then we said, okay, but who is going to help us manage the database and all of that? And there was nobody on the continent that could sort of help us do it in real time. Of course, there was Strive's outfit that was doing other things. And so we reached out to some outfit in Dubai, and they said it would be $1 billion or $500 million or something to do it, because it was AI, it was high technology. And we thought, on the continent where there's so many youth and all this initiative, why would we go, if we had that kind of money, why would we do that? So we decided to go, again, leadership. We thought, where can we do this? Randomly speaking to the president of Congo-Brazzaville, he was opening a new university. And he goes, I'll give you one wing of the university to set up a center. And so he gave us immediately a wing of a university that he was building. They added that additional wing. We went to the Chinese, and they gave us supercomputers and things. And the phone companies gave us this data. And we had it, and the idea was then that we would start looking at, we were trying to get, I'm an economist, so we're trying to get the price of things also, trying to understand whether the cost of living was going up with COVID. And so we wanted people to send us sort of what was the price of bread this morning in the locality where you live, just to get a sense of the cost of living as COVID was coming in. But I mean, it was, again, President Sassou Nguesso, just saying, okay, take my center, work with it, have the classes, and do this. And I think, again, this was, in those times of stress, you were able to see sort of the emergence of leadership, of goodwill, because, we didn't have any resources to do this. But I really want to pay tribute here to the former CEO of MTN, who just, took the charge and ran with it. And normally telco companies don't collaborate with each other, right? They're competing, they are cutthroat. But this is what COVID did. It got MTN to speak to Orange and work together on this kind of stuff.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And one of the things in talking about Africans coming together, one of the facts of Africa is through the colonial history, you have a very fragmented continent. a continent with a lot of landlocked nations, island nations. If you are a country like Nigeria and you're calling up the Chinese to order a bunch of masks, sure, you have 200 million people, they'll take your call. But if you're a little tiny island nation like Seychelles, you're not getting a call back. And it was Strive's work on the African Medical Supply Platform and the work of all of AVATT that really solved that. So if we can watch Strive talking about the African Medical Supply Platform.
It was very clear that early on that was all going to be national. When you called the suppliers, they would begin to tell us, we're not allowed to ship anything, even if you have the money. So we then say to these guys, let's create a bulk purchasing platform, like Amazon, just for government. Let's show the global manufacturing industries that Africa is 1.3 billion people. Okay, I said, give me that muscle. Elephants come from Africa, so we have long memories. If you don't help us now, we will remember. That was usually my opening gambit. 2 weeks later, the platform was out. The EU called us to say, we've been looking at your platform. Goodness, we should have done something like this.
And by the way, Strive, it's not just the EU, because one of the interviews that you suggested was Gail Smith, and she said that they had a big thing for health ministers and everybody here, and everyone was chasing after the Africans saying, how'd you do that? We should have done that. So, but Strive, you know, one of the things that I think is so interesting, an Amazon for governments, that sounds so easy, like it's just a technical thing of setting up a platform. But it's so incredibly difficult to change the way that procurement happens. Like, this is incredibly revolutionary in what you did. And I just would love for you to talk about why this was so unusual. Because the concept sounds simple, you know, but the reality is it's not.
No, thank you. Actually, it began with the Chinese. Because when we had the problem of test kits, you got to remember how this thing progressed. So our first requirement were things like test kits and PPE. And manufacture of those things was primarily China. Everybody was going to China. The Europeans were buying from China. Everybody was going there. So we recommended to President Ramaphosa that he reach out to the Chinese as the African Union and say, give us a quota. And so President Xi Jinping agreed. He says, okay, we will give you so many a month, but you buy. And since you are buying, you'll be given just a few days to confirm whether or not you're going to buy them. Now remember, we are not the EU. We have no central budget. So how do I now buy them? I was told, here's 60 million test kits. Okay, with two problems. With no central budget. The EU has no central budget. Secondly, the countries are strained. They don't have this crisis in their budgets. So Professor Orama and Vera Songwe turned to them to say, okay, how do we get these guys to pay? Professor Orama says, the bank will have to lend money to the countries. That's how complicated it gets. So during the day, we've got to fix all this and then meet in the evening to figure out whether it's working. So he gets all the central bank governors. She gets all the ministers of finance. We're going to lend you guys money to buy this stuff, but you're only going to have a few days to confirm whether or not you're taking your order. Okay, so how do we get to know the order? Okay, I get all my techies to say, you know how Amazon works? I want that platform. Build one, but it's only going to have 55 customers, the governments. That's how we did it. So we built the tech stack. from the beginning. When people have nothing else to do except to do stuff, everybody's at home. So we're calling engineers, everybody, listen, build this. This is how it's going to work, and they built it. We showed it to the heads of state. They said, fine, go ahead. So now we've got to build the institutions, because the suppliers are now saying, okay, but who is our customer? Who are we contracting with? So we create AVATT. So we have to create it as a trust, not-for-profit institution owned by the African governments, which can now contract. Africa Medical Supplies Platform, we have to institutionalize that. So basically, we created a mini Amazon, as you might say. Shopping carts, everything. You order. The credit card is the Afreximbank. We're paying the suppliers. The entire bank, the payment system. Oh, by the way, they wanted to be insured. So we created an insurance company to compensate people like Pfizer, because they wouldn't sell us stuff without the insurance in the bank. I'm truncating this, but you can imagine ministers of finance, central bank governors meeting. So we were just coordinators. So we'd say, Vera, go talk to the finance ministers, and John, please, the health ministers must be there. The central bank governors must be there. And that's how the three of us, the team was working to coordinate, to make sure that everybody came in. But we needed our private sector to basically step in when we needed certain things that were very private sector specific, as she mentioned, with the telecom players, local manufacturers, and so forth.
That's amazing. And really, I think that is what is so extraordinary. When you really listen to the story of AVATT, it's like a thriller. At every step, there was some roadblock that was there, and the four of you getting together with the other people, like, okay, what do we do? Okay, we're going to do this. Oh, next roadblock. Okay, what are we going to do? It's really an amazing story. We're going to get to the economic part, but just before we do, Dr. Nkengasong, one of the big things around the vaccines that happened was the World Health Organization and others saying that Africa needed 20% in order to get to herd immunity. Now, we all remember in the US and in every other country in the world, we were told it was 60%. And for some reason in Africa, it was 20%, but you disagreed. Can you tell us that story?
No, thank you. Let me, before I get to the story, just compliment the story of leadership. I think the COVID response is an example of how the African Union really showed leadership. In the first cases of COVID hit the continent on February 15 in Egypt. And the African Union called a meeting of all ministers of health and WHO on the 22nd of February in Addis Ababa in person. I remember when the invitations went out, there was skepticism. People said, well, the ministers will not be in Addis in 1 week. It's very difficult. But Chidi Moeti is here. She came in person. So I just want to acknowledge her presence. And Tedros was on a Zoom call. That is where the joint continental strategy was agreed on. That had to deal with the need to cooperate, to collaborate, to coordinate our efforts. It's a good lesson on leadership that the AU showed at that time, and I'm sure that Commissioner Muchanga will take this back to the AU and let them know that we still remember their leadership role. I think it's easy for me to just sit and enjoy the stories because Strive and Vera and Prof are better storytellers than I am. I mean, when they tell the stories now, I recall the stories, but they sound like fresh stories to me because, I mean, you were so deep in in the trenches that it just didn't smell the roses. It was just tough. I mean, tough times to do that. Now, the story of the vaccine, 20% and 60% ran like this. I think COVAX said Africa, they were able to supply Africa with 20% of the vaccines because they needed to vaccinate priority populations, people, healthcare workers, the elderly, people with conditions. But we did our own analysis, and we said we went to the head of states with Strive. And by the way, those calls with the 15 head of states were stressful because I have never briefed a head of state. And then suddenly you're briefing 15 head of states. So my heart will be racing in my chest like this. I mean, like, what do you say to this head of states? I mean, they may fire you. And, so, but you had to prepare your PowerPoint slides and make them in a way that drew the attention in visuals, but easy to understand. Not to say the head of states are not smart, but they are sitting there on the Zoom and looking at you like you are the only one talking. It was very, yet untranslated. It was scary to just be in the midst of that. But I argued there that based on everything, I mean, all the mathematics, the transmission models of HIV, there's what we call the R0 and whatever, you need 60%. I mean, was that well received? No, it wasn't received at all. I remember Donna Kaburuka calling me. It was the shortest call I've received from anyone, a Zoom call. And he said, John, would you take the 60% to the bank? I said, yes, we'll take the 60% to the bank. That was, you needed to get to 60% vaccination. So I think then that's why AVATT was created, because when we turned to President Ramaphosa on a Saturday, he said, so if we are getting 20% from COVAX, how do we get to 60%? So we're looking to fill that gap. And he said, I remember in quote, go out there and get the vaccines. Do not repent on getting the vaccines. I think that was the charger to Strive. Then Strive scared me. He said, I'm going to get the vaccines and to the airports, and it will be a business, John, to get it to the arms. I said, no, we have to do this together. He scared me.
John, with John there was just, listen, I'm not getting to the arms of people. That's your problem. So I think just to kind of give you some context. So we now know that the vaccines are coming. But the international community through COVAX is saying we will deliver to Africa 20%. But John, our chief scientist, and his group are saying we don't get to herd immunity below 60%. Okay? The world doesn't want to hear us talk of we want 60% when we're 1.3 billion people. So these meetings, and remember, during the day, we are meeting with our global partners. We were meeting with the Europeans, we're meeting with the World Bank, and everyone. And Pers is now saying, John, with his 60% target is unrealistic, it's not right, there's a lot of anger, and I have to go with John to the heads of states who are now being directly lobbied. And so the presidents are now saying, where are you guys getting the 60% from? And we're saying, we've got to go for 60%. Okay, so, but we persuade the Bureau that it's 60% and we need now to go raise them. So President Ramaphosa says, okay, the heads of state, after you guys walked off, have accepted your 60%. Now go get the money. Because the international community were not going to support us, okay? President Macron came on behalf of the European Union to the meeting. And he said, look, we will support COVAX up to 30%. It's a 50-50. You will have to find the other 50%, the other 30% to get to your 60 target. You must fund it yourself. But they're saying that with an unfunded COVAX. So even the 30% is not committed until President Biden comes to office. Okay, so we only would begin our meetings, and I would be urging John, remind the heads of state. When HIV, when antiretrovirals became available, to when Africans got them, it was 10 years. We are not going to do that with vaccines. That was really our war battle cry. We are not going to accept to wait at the end of the queue. And that meant that the only way we can get to the front of the queue is if we have a check in our hand. So we had to be able to say, listen, we're not asking for your donations. We're asking to be at the counter with you, to buy at the same time as you. And that's what the world had not been prepared for. They would say, no, we will give you vaccines. We say, no, we don't want to be given. We want to buy. We want to be at the table with you when you buy at the counter. Let's just share what's there. If there's 300 million doses, calculate. We're 1.3 billion. What's our percentage of the global population? That's what we want as a share of what's available. So this is how this whole battle was being fought out in the background, and our heads of state got involved, and eventually we do get to a place where this, we've got to test whether or not we can get the money. The suppliers are beginning to say, okay, we will supply, but we want you to tell us you have the money. We needed $3 billion to pay for the vaccines. Once we knew we could get access to them. That was the key thing. And Vera, her job was to convene the finance ministers. So she convened them. And we said, we own this one institution, Afreximbank. Its balance sheet cannot provide us $3 billion. It's our African Export Institute. It's owned by the member states. You will have to increase the capital of the bank immediately so that we can make payment. And the largest shareholders were Egypt and Nigeria. And they all gathered. She got them into the room. The governors, he was there. He made his pitch. Tell them, Prof.
No, thank you very much. To go and tell somebody at the height of COVID with the economic crisis, to increase the capital of the bank, the way we put it would look insensitive. I recall even that Strive, when we were planning about the capital increase, Strive was saying we should go for a capital increase of $5 billion. And I regret I didn't follow that. But I think Vera said, look, we are fighting for the SDR. So we tell them that you commit, if the SDRs come, you use the SDRs to pay. If you don't have the money, you use the SDR. So we had the meeting with the largest shareholders that Strive referred to. And the big shareholders, Nigeria, Egypt, Zimbabwe, they all said, go for it. And we go for a capital increase. That is the paid-in capital increase of $2.6 billion and total capital increase $6.4 billion. We thought it would be difficult for them to, usually our shareholders responded very, very quickly to a capital increase. But this was a very difficult time. So we thought this would take a bit of time. We said, okay, let's give them 5 years. We even structured even ways maybe they could pay in local currency, and we do forward foreign exchange transactions with the central banks, and against that we could use it to fund things. Because there was a time we were talking about buying vaccine for $7 billion because of the price of Moderna and Pfizer. So when we then, they approved this capital increase, and by the way, they approved it by correspondence. They actually made payment the first year, made payment of about 70% of what we asked for, even beyond our expectations. In the midst of the difficulties, many did not wait for SDR to make that payment. And it was with that firepower that we were able to then support the $2 billion we eventually used to procure the vaccines. And the other things we did, Vera, you recall the facilities we put for manufacturers and so on and so forth, and even for food imports. So there are also special facilities. And then two disbursements we made under the Pandemic Impact Facility within 18 months became $10 billion. But if not for those, the quick intervention and action taken by the shareholders of the bank, we wouldn't have been able to do that. Thank you.
Really, Egypt and Nigeria as the two largest shareholders in that one meeting. The two finance ministers looked at each other and they said, we'll do it, we're in. And really, I must really commend, I'll never forget the Nigerian finance minister, because she chaired that meeting. Yeah, and she said, we are not leaving this room because the alternative is to condemn our own people. And then, of course, we also have to give credit to Dr. Tedros. Because it was really complicated because we had to have meetings with the IMF. Because remember, we're asking the governments to put up the money, but they don't have money. We needed the SDRs. And we had the other 6, my colleagues, the other 6 special envoys, Trevor, Tijantiam, all these guys, Ngozi, and so forth. So they were working to unlock the funding because we couldn't send people home like you could in the United States and pay them to stay at home. Our economies, we couldn't print money. The rest of the world was printing money. We live with that inflation today, in case you wonder where it came from, and then it was exported to us, okay? So we knew these challenges would come. So we had the meetings with the IMF, with the World Bank, and Tedros would meet with us. Tedros would join our principals meetings because he's an African. And we would scream at him and say, Tedros, tomorrow you get the IMF. Don't come back for another term. You get them into the meetings because we want this. And he would say, on my side, our institution is on sides. Every single vaccine, remember, all these medicines that were coming through, we needed regulatory approvals for them. It wasn't just a straightforward thing that whatever you threw at us. We were meeting with all the manufacturers, the Chinese, we had to certify the Russian vaccine, Sputnik, and the rest of it, So there's a lot going on, but I think we could go on forever. I have a hard stop, unfortunately, but I really appreciate that you could join us in going down memory lane. But really, at the end of the day, don't look at the... Or somebody wants to know about the vaccine manufacturer in South Africa. I don't want to start a diplomatic incident. Okay. The bottom line is one of the major American manufacturers was actually using a South African manufacturer to produce on contract to meet the needs in Europe. That's what happened. And we were as stunned as any of you that there was a company in South Africa contracted to produce 300 million doses a year while we had no vaccines. Fortunately, we were able to, President Ramaphosa and the African leaders were able to get people, common sense to prevail. So those vaccines remained on the continent and became part of our supply chain. We paid for them. So, you know, we didn't take anything from anybody by force. We paid for them. But my colleague mentioned the US government. It's fair to always say when something good is done. When the new administration came in, there was a swift change of policy. That's just a factual thing. Okay, there was a swift change in policy. They came to us, they said, how can we help? We said, well, look, you say you don't allow shipments out of the United States. Could you please shift that so that we can buy from the US? They said, we'll go one further. We'll get COVAX the money it needs. So they funded COVAX. COVAX began to ship its end of the vaccines. And we got our end of the vaccines done. John continued with his vaccination program. We started seeing our shipments by June that year. The first shipments into Europe and the United States had started around about January. So we cut the lead time from 10 years to 6 months. So the next pandemic, make sure you keep it lower. Thank you and God bless.
That's fantastic. You know, Strive, one of the things you actually had said about Professor Roma that I just loved, you came out of a meeting, I believe it was in Tokyo, or I think on Zoom. Yeah, and they were all the donors, and they were all talking about COVAX, and COVAX very clearly was not going to be funded. And they said, yes, and you said, Professor Roma turned to you and said, if we don't do something, our children will spit on our graves. And when you look at Africa of 70% youth, that's a big population to be angry with you. And if not for these guys, I want to just finish with showing a video.
Because I have to jump off, but let me just give you the numbers. I think John told you that every single death is a tragedy. That was the measure on the other side of this whole thing. Okay? We started off with terror, possibly 20 million. At one point, we had to deal with the fact that one of the variants came out of Africa, if you recall. And those were all crises for us in this whole battle. But here's where we ended up. I think about 250,000 recorded deaths. The lowest death rate in the entire world was Africa. The United States, I think you're 4% of the world's population, you took 20% of COVID's deaths. Okay? That's a tragedy because you gave the world the vaccine. Okay? We continued to vaccinate for months, long after. When we had problems of vaccine resistance, we met even with church and religious leaders across the continent. John organized at one time 400 pastors and imams. And we said, come on, guys, let's get this thing sorted out. And our people took the vaccine. So we are very grateful for all the support that we received, and for all those who participated, well done. We were just your representatives, that's all. Thank you.
So, before you go, is there one of you
So, Carol,
So,
before Strive
Oh.
runs away, let me share an embarrassing story with Strive. Those stories. So he pushed us to go further, and pushing Prof to go to 7 billion. You know, Mastercard Foundation availed us $1.3 billion to support Africa CDC to respond.
MasterCard is with us today.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that. I mean, that was a historic moment. So 1.3 billion, and that was the largest grant that any philanthropic organization had given to in a single time donation. We're making progress, and Strive called me one evening and said, I think you should go to Rita and ask for 300 million, for 200 million more. And I was like scared. I was like, how do I go to beg another 200 million? He said, good, because Moderna vaccines had been available. So I texted Rita. I said, Rita, can we talk? So and when the call started, I didn't know what to do. How do you ask somebody for another 200 million where they've given you 1.3 billion? Anyway, I rambled towards the end. It's a call about something, but it's about something else. In the end, I tabled the 200 million, and the Mastercard Foundation came with 200 million. So I really want to acknowledge that. I mean, the Mastercard Foundation for that. Yeah.
You know, before we finish the panel discussion, and then we'll go to another announcement, and we'll just keep you a couple minutes more, Strive. I know you have to go, but one thing that's important to remember with COVID is it wasn't just a health crisis. It also was an economic crisis, both on a micro and a macro scale. And we've talked a lot about what Afreximbank did during the time in getting the vaccines, putting the money on the table, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten the vaccines. But also it's important to remember all that Afreximbank did to make sure that countries didn't go into default. And so with that, we will just end with a video of, if we can watch Professor Arama talking about the economic crisis.
The pandemic was a health crisis, but it had economic consequences. If we didn't intervene, countries would start defaulting on trade debt payments. Then the real crisis will come that will outlast the COVID-19 pandemic. We knew this time we had to rise to the challenge ourselves. It would be naive to expect anybody to support you at this time. Economy had to operate. Countries have to be able to honor their obligations. Food imports had to continue to happen. We provided the financing required to provide the food, to provide the medical equipment, the PPEs, the test kits, and all of that. We were there to make sure that countries did not default on their trade debt payment. You must always take your destiny in your hands.
With that, I am going to pass it back over to Zane, and thank you so much, all four of you.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate and respect the timings here. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. It really was a thriller, and the good guys won. So that's wonderful. Thank you for your commitment and your courageousness, the fortitude and the innovation for such an extraordinary moment. And thank you for your advocacy, your arguing, maybe your ranting, actually. Thank you for everything that you did to insist that Africa should have its own health security. We thank you and we salute you. And before we close out, we would just like to make an important announcement, because Africa's story in this period is also being narrated in a book. It's called Riding the Storm, The Untold Story of Africa's Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic by Tony Khan, with authorized interviews from His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, as well as words from all our panelists. So we just want to take this moment to reveal the cover of the new book, to share it with you. It would make a very good Christmas gift. And we want to say congratulations and hongera in Swahili for getting us to this moment and having this incredible book also that will capture all of these stories and more. We'd like to leave you now with a short video that captures why this book will be such a valuable asset for students, scholars, young people, and historians. And I may ask our panelists also, please take your seats, and if you need to be elsewhere, please do. Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. There is a moment here that we are trying to capture with the four of you to actually reveal the book cover. So this is the grand unveiling. So if I may ask all the principals to come toward the area and just step around it, and we will unveil it as swiftly as we can. Thank you. After 3, 1, 2, 3. Woo! Congratulations. This is the very first time you're seeing copies of the book, Riding the Storm. Yes.
Tirelessly working. Because after that, you can imagine how difficult it has been to put us all together. And he's been the force behind it.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we very much appreciate your patience, and thank you for staying to hear some of the most amazing stories. We'd like you to look at this short video that encapsulates the highlights of the book. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention, please, once again. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention, please. Everyone, you've been so fantastic. If I may have your attention for one moment, I would like to call up on stage a young poet who would like to share some words about her experiences in poetic form. She's a Pan-Africanist and a huge talent for the continent. So I'd like to invite her up on stage. Please join us. Thank you.